Thanks, Miriam. And I'll just start screen sharing. So thank you, Miriam, and thank you all for joining us today. And I'll just briefly introduce the series that is brought to you by Global Tapestry of Alternatives and Global Dialogue for Systemic Change, Dialogue on Alternatives in the Times of Global Crisis. So very similar to the working group, the emergence of Global Tapestry of Alternatives lies in recognizing that we are currently dealing with multiple forms of global crisis, ranging from biodiversity loss, climate change, excessive pollution, resulting in very severe inequalities and deprivations, also resulting in many conflicts and rise of authoritarianism. And this increased and continued project of colonization and homogenization, which is of course resulting in a lot of personal crises of alienation, depression, meaninglessness in lives. And with the COVID pandemic, which is very closely linked to these other global crises, we see these crises even more starkly. And people who've been blinded to look at the repercussions of these crises can see it more clearly. But these crises are being responded to in a form of resistance, like what is happening currently in India with farmers resisting against state policies, but also in other parts of the world, which we saw with Black Lives Matter and what's happening in Latin America. And basically, these all movements in many ways are articulating different ways of being, knowing, working, and dreaming, not just through their resistance, but also through their constructive alternatives, which we see across the world, emerging in forms of various cosmologies, worldviews, and philosophies of how we can organize ourselves in different ways and different social lives. So the global tapestry of alternatives is not a project, it's not an organization, it's a process which is which intends to create the spaces of collaboration, learning, and exchange among these radical alternatives across the world, creating a space to offer active solidarity whenever they're threatened. Importantly, creating a visibility to alternatives, which we don't really come to know about, we don't see them often, we don't get to know about them, and hence creating these spaces of dialogue as well, supporting and inspiring on other alternative initiatives, and creating a critical mass for a macro change, something that concerns all of us, of how do we really bring about this macro change, and hence creating that group of or collectives of people to actually bring that about, and stimulating collective visions of just world through dialogue, through more collaborations. Can we actually get together in collective envisioning? And you can read more about the Global Tapestry and what we are doing on this website. And we have been organizing these webinars to actually bring a lot of these visions together, which started with our colleagues from South Africa sharing about potential for just transitions and their work during COVID pandemic, to new agriculture movement that's emerging in Bangladesh, towards Commons Future from Europe, how indigenous communities in Mexico are responding to COVID pandemic, from Freud rebellion, resistance, and alternatives emerging from that, responses of Kurdish women's movement, and what are the technological visions that are emerging from the Americas. Community from Peru, Potato Park, defending their past, envisioning their future, and how they're responding to the crisis. Very interesting interventions from Europe on well-being and degrowth movement, what it means for the Europe, and also for and what can be the cross learnings from other parts of the world. We had a very interesting dialogue from Finland about sharing their 10,000 years old of winter fisheries, and how the responses from the polar north matter to what happens also in the global south. We were joined by women farmers and collectors from India of how they responded to the COVID pandemic, and what are the alternative models that they're imagining and creating in these times. And the last one was of self-determination and coping with COVID pandemic from our colleagues from Bolivia. And this is the latest one, our 14th dialogue, which is being organized with Global Working Group Beyond Development, Rosa Luxemburg Brussels office, and Global Tapestry of Alternatives. And we're really looking forward to this very exciting dialogue on urban transformations around the world. And to just introduce this dialogue, I would invite Miriam and Mabrouka to take it forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shrishti, and thank you to all the GTA team for co-organizing this, and also, of course, to the Rosa Luxemburg Brussels team. We are also very happy to be co-working with you. I just posted in the public chat the website of the Global Working Group for those who would like to know more about it. And now I would like to introduce my co-moderator today, Mabrouka. She is also co-editor of the book we will be talking about and part of the facilitation team of our working group. And she is from Tunisia, where she was part of the Constituent Assembly after the 2011 revolution. And she currently lives in the USA, where she studies a PhD in sociology at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. So I now hand over to Mabrouka, who will introduce her work to you on the book, the book itself, and the speakers.
Thank you so much, Miriam, and thank you, Shriti. It's a massive honor to work with Global Tapestry of an Alternative Rosa Luxemburg Brussels office to weave our energy and build synergy and share knowledge and create knowledge. And this reminds me of a person, a friend of mine. He's a geographer, and he does documentary, Habib Ayeb from Tunis. We brought his documentary, Seeds of Dignity. I have to say his documentary kind of gave me a little bit of inspiration for the title of this book, Seeds of Dignity. And he said, solidarity, it's about sharing struggles. And from sharing struggles, we can acknowledge us and know each other. So I think what the Global Tapestry is doing and the Global Working Group Beyond Development is doing is to give voice, to give a platform for all these extraordinary transformative processes that are happening right now, and just to connect and just to acknowledge. We might not change the world, but we know that some people are doing extraordinary work during the day-to-day life. So it's a massive honor. Thank you. First, I want to talk about the book. But first, I want to thank my co-editor, because this was a massive work with, I think it involved about 32 people from all different countries with all the case studies. So I'd like a special thank to Yorgos Velagrakis, to Rafael Hutmer, and to Ana Rodriguez, who's with us today. I wanted to briefly explain how this book came, and as a global working group beyond development, this space where we're trying to talk about systemic transformation, we realized that we were easily gravitating around rural places. And every time we were thinking about transformation, it was easier to just think about rural places. And we wonder why. Some of us thought, well, maybe because rural places are far from economic and political center, where agendas of domination are brewed in centers of cities. Or maybe because rural areas do have strong concepts like food sovereignty, for example. Or land. The land is so essential, and caring for land, which is more possible in a rural place, might be a way to create more transformations. So we decided that we need to dig a little further and investigate on urban area, because urban transformation is not just about urban gardens, right? So as we investigated, we got in touch with amazing activists and popular educator and people doing amazing work from all around the world. And we put this book together. So let me tell you very briefly what the book is about. So Cities of Dignity, urban alternatives around the world. It begins with an analysis of the political economy of the urban commons, which was drafted by Mauro Castro and Marti Costa. Chapter 2 is a survey of all the existing transnational initiative and trans-solidarity platforms in support of local urban transformation. And this was drafted by Manahan and Khristine Alvarez, who are here with us and will present the findings. The book then presents 7 case studies of such urban transformation towards more democratic, sustainable, socially equitable, and anti-patriarchal relation from below in a series of case studies. The first case studies is the San Roque market of Quito, Ecuador, and that's a fascinating case that explains how markets are more just places of exchange of commodification or commodified goods, but they're a place of community building and strategy for transformation. And this was written by Ana Rodriguez, who is with us today, and Patrick Ollenstein. The next chapter is the urban resistance of the Isadora community in Belo Horizonte in Brazil, which was written by Isabella. And today we have Juliana, who is going to comment on this kinds of transformation and urban resistance in Brazil, in light of what you all heard about this police killing that is happening right now. The fifth chapter is a learning journey about the US, and it's not what you would expect. It's about a travel of a North African person, me, and an amazing person who just transitioned, and and they became an ancestor 2 months ago, Elandria Williams. This was an amazing chapter because we traveled together in Mississippi, in Birmingham, and in Detroit to meet her community and to see what they're doing. We were honored to talk and meet with people from the Smithfield Dynamite Hill Land Trust, the Automotive Free Clinic, the Corporation Jackson, the Cass Corridor Commons, the Box Center in Detroit, the D-Town Farm. And I just wanted to say a word about Elandria. That she was an incredible person, grounded in reality. She impersonated Black feminist thoughts, and she challenged my thinking about what knowledge is. And she taught me that knowledge is produced every day. It doesn't have to be written. And everyday life, people are doing some small act of resistance. So I think that this book carried her spirit and her wisdom, and I just want to honor her memory. And for this chapter, I invited someone from her community in Detroit, and Bryce Detroit, an artist, an activist in Afrofuturism and fighting against gentrification, is going to talk about his amazing work in Detroit. The next chapter is, we have 2 chapters about slum dwellers. One is about the community, the slums of Makoko and Maroko in Lagos, Nigeria, which is written by Asume Isaac Osueka, who is going to be with us today, and Obidun Arumu. We do have a chapter on a communitarian currency experimentation written by Marion Covey and Ruth Mwangi, which is happening in Kenya. Chapter 7, I believe, is this extraordinary story that is happening in war-torn Syria. Ansar Jazim tells us about the 15th Garden Food Sovereignty Network, which, despite the food siege and despite the many imperialist interventions in Syria, people were able to build food sovereignty and solidarity to feed people. And this is an incredible case that I urge everybody to read. And the last but not least is the case of the self-determination and self-organization of the slum dweller of Burj, India. And we have today Asim Mishra and Sandeep Virmani, who will tell us about this extraordinary transformation. The last chapter is a collective reflection. And we took all of these cases and all the participants of the global working group were thinking about this case, but not to try to find the strategy that would work for everybody, but some strategies or some lessons or some issues that we find out. And so these, you can find them in that last chapter, Collective Reflection. You can download the book for free, and we will put this link on the chat. And now we will have in order our presenter. We will start with Miriam, Manahan, and Alvarez. Then we will have the case of, I believe, Asim Mishra and Sandeep Virmani from India. The third presentation will be Bryce Detroit, and the fourth will be Asume Osuoka from Nigeria. Let me now present you the next presenter. Miriam Manahan, she is a feminist activist researcher, an academic assistant, and a PhD student in the Department of Conflict and Development Studies at Ghent University in Belgium. Prior to her post at the department, she has worked in various social movement and civil society groups on different national and international campaigns and initiatives that demand equity, environmental, gender, and social justice and alternative in the last 17 years. Outside of academia, she was involved in women peasant movement in the Philippines. She is a co-facilitator of the Beyond Development Working Group, and she works on diverse platform of activism. She holds an undergraduate degree in sociology, University of the Philippines, and a master's degree in globalization and development from the Institute of Development's Policy Management at the University of Antwerp. And her co-author, Maria Khristine Alvarez, she's a PhD student at the Bartel Development Planning Unit at the University of College London. She's the recipient of the 2018 Anniversary Doctoral Scholarship Award, and she won a thesis award of the American Association of Geographers. Her PhD research examines how a resilient Metro Manila is being built in the aftermath of the 2009 flood disaster. And she has published theoretical and empirical articles in the International Journal of Urban and Regional Research and Radical Housing Journal. Without further ado, I invite the two speakers to present their case.
Thank you very much, Mabrouka. Our intervention will have two parts. First, I will share about the importance of national solidarity and learning platforms for radical urban transformation, while my co-author team will talk about what we mean by radical urban transformation, especially in the light of broad appeals to retrofit urban spaces. So we want to highlight that, and we've written that in our book chapter, that there is a rise and expansion of transnational solidarity and learning platforms that are deeply rooted in popular struggles for the right to the city. So around housing rights, right to water, energy democracy, food provisioning and mobility, right to education and other essential services. The right to the city for us is a political ideal and slogan that centers on the power of collective action to simultaneously transform urban spaces, urban life, urban citizens, and even urban-rural relationship. So these transnational solidarity platforms, and you see in one of the slides, I will come to that in a bit, are locally embedded but internationally networked initiatives that share a common political project of resisting the impacts of neoliberal urbanism, such as massive dispossession and displacement of communities and peoples, as well as privatization of communal spaces on one hand, and on the other, they share an impetus and fundamental desire to envisage and create spaces and cities where people live in dignity and harmony with their nature. So one concrete example that is already shown in your slide is the Transformative Cities Atlas of Utopia initiative led by Transnational Institute, HIC, RIPES, Global Coalition for the Right to the City, ECOLIS, and Friends of the Earth International, in which they show how cities can be sites of radical urban transformative praxis, as well as an initiative that builds and aims to build an atlas of real utopias, and make these experiences viral, as well as share learnings that comes from implementing and building these experiments. A common case is the remunicipalization of privatized water and energy systems, in which citizens, people's organizations, or public authorities have taken over and claimed back their water and energy systems in a radically democratic way. While these remunicipalization struggles are waged at the national or local context, they have an important internationalist dimension. That is, many of them have connected and learn from each other, much as what we're doing right now, especially how transnational private companies work around the world, what strategies have worked, what strategies have not. And secondly, they have exchanged ideas and lessons in reclaiming and rebuilding public services that are anchored on principles of radical democracy, direct democracy, principles around solidarity, equity, and even commoning. So for example, the Jakarta remunicipalization that is being waged in the last 10 years has learned a lot from experiences in the Cochabamba water wars in 2000 in Latin America, as well as the takeover of Eau de Paris that took over the French water transnational's ownership of the water system in 2010. Mabrouka, can you go into the third slide, please? So the graphic that I will show you shows the mapping, the amazing mapping that was done by Transnational Institute and its many partners, which shows that around 1,408 remunicipalization of public services, where more than 2,400 cities in 58 countries have brought public services back under public and community control since 2000. So it's not merely a trend, but actually a counter movement of radical urban transformations and against privatization. So they involve well-focused, politically engaged approaches which aim to build horizontal and vertical alliances, as well as forge translocal and transnational solidarity to reclaim space and civic participation and even radicalized participation, or the very concept and practice of participation. Over to you, Tin.
Yes, thanks, man. So, in closing, we just wish to emphasize our key point, which does not only underpin the cases of urban transformation discussed throughout the book, but also resonates more loudly in the wake of broad appeals in recent months to retrofit or redesign cities. And the takeaway is urban transformation is enabled by a radical urban politics centered on upholding human dignity. It is the people who drive and lead urban transformation. And by people, we mean urban citizens. And by urban citizens, we pertain not simply to a registered population, but importantly, to marginalized and impoverished groups of people who reside in cities and may hold the status of a legitimate citizen, but are nonetheless denied the right to thrive. Urban transformation is not about retrofitting a space, redesigning landscapes, or reconfiguring the city. It is never simply about building more parks, more bike lanes, or more recreational spaces. Without fundamental changes to access, rights, and political participation, design-led and infrastructure-focused interventions risk perpetuating and even creating more inequalities. Cities of dignity are neither brought to life by superstar architects nor designed by urban planners. Rather, they are created by practicing a radical urban politics that is centered on human dignity and grounded in principles of emancipatory social justice. That is to say, urban transformation is in the hands of the people. You put urban citizens in the driver's seat. Concretely, this means you let people determine the agenda. You don't just aim for inclusivity or participation. You let people set the terms of participation. And I will push this further by saying that you don't just radicalize participation, but perhaps importantly, foster what anthropologist James Holston calls insurgent citizenship, which is capable of building a corresponding insurgent urbanism. I think these are the ideas that tie the cases we discuss in our chapter, and also those presented in other chapters. And I guess I will stop there and let that idea simmer. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your presentation. I have to say this is a great transition, Tin, because one such insurgent citizenship and transformation in the hand of people happened in Bhuj, India. And we have with us Sandeep Virmani, who is based in Western India, and he has worked in the field of housing planning infrastructure. He has used two important methodology in his work. Based on participatory solution building by combining the vigor of modern science and established community knowledge. And second, every solution He thinks that every solution should help reduce emission and increase bioindicator of ecosystem. He has worked in the Yurnarshala Foundation, which has built thousands of homes, reviving and modernizing technique of building with earth, wood, stone, and bamboo. And he has worked on a process called Sanjivan, which has helped the government recognize the science of pastoral animal husbandry toward a sustainable economic production system that increased the biodiversity of grassland, torn forest, and mangrove ecosystem. We have with us also Asim Mishra. Oh, I'm sorry, this was the alarm, who is a radical urban planner, and he works for the program Homes in the City as the program director, as a matter of fact. Home in the City is an innovative program coordinated by 5 civil society organizations having similar philosophy, working on diverse theme in the city of Bourges. And it's working with issue-based collective citizens and several other organizations. They are collectively developing Bourges to be a city where citizens, particularly the urban poor, improve their social economic condition and access basic service through political participation and local governance. Prior to joining this program, Asim has worked in various civil society organizations, governmental departments, and academic institutions. Take it away. Thank you.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, you are. Could you share your screen?
Yeah, the host will have to allow my video to come on.
Okay.
Asim, in the meantime, can I ask you to put the presentation on, please?
Yes, I do.
No, somehow my video is not coming on, but I can start the presentation if that is all right. Okay, let me start by thanking Mabrouka, you and Miriam for giving us this great opportunity to, one, be part of this book, and now to be part of this wonderful seminar that you have organized, this webinar that you have organized. I also need to actually thank Ashish and Srishti for actually recommending our case to both of you so that we could become part of this entire process over the last 1 year. And we really thoroughly enjoyed working with all of you. Let me start by talking to you about the city of Bhuj. Asim, the next slide. The city of Bhuj is a small city. We are about 250,000 people in this city on the border of India and Pakistan. This is an arid area, and but it's a very old city. It was the capital of a kingdom 500 years ago. But over the last few years, especially over the last 2 decades, after we had a big earthquake here, our city has grown from just being 6 square kilometers to being 56 square kilometers now. And 30% of this small city actually live in informal settlements, mostly centered around the north of the city. And this has become a kind of a north-south divide for the city, where all the municipal resources tend to go to the south, while the north is always facing deprivation. Kind of a reverse situation globally, I guess. And these 30% are the people who obviously, like in every other city, provide the services to the rest of the city. Yeah, next. So our cities are such complex creatures, and to try and see how we can have an equally complex response to this, we got 5 different organizations to come together, and with very different skills. We also set up many CBOs, community organizations, in this entire process. And the objective was that we must empower the vulnerable communities, strengthen people's democracies, and through decentralization of municipal powers, get women in the driving seat, because they are so good at getting consensus built amongst people. And of course, look at ecological justice, which is really held by a lot of these communities that have come from rural areas into our cities, and they know how to do it much better than we have done in our cities. So democratic decentralization, equity, and ecological interventions is the three pillars on which we have tried to build this entire program. So as I said, we have 5 different organizations, one working on water management, another working on urban governance, third working on biodiversity conservation, a fourth working on gender equity and justice, and another working on urban issues and urban building and infrastructure. So the 5 organizations came together, and over the last decade or so, we have been able to create several people's organizations. So for example, Sakhi Sangini is a collective of over 3,000 women living in the slums. They are really the bedrock of a lot of the work that is happening in this program. We also have an organization of assorted people from across the city who are working on the issue of water management. We'll discuss that in a short while with you. We also have, actually, we have a Sangathan, a collective of people who hold animals and who provide milk and meat to the city. And they are living in our slums. They provide almost 40% of our food to the city, but are totally unrecognized. We also have a migrant workers association, a street vendors association, and a sex workers association. And the whole thing is coming together in a ward. The city is divided into 11 wards, and they are legal bodies. They are the real bodies that are expected to actually do their planning and run the programs, and the municipal corporations are supposed to provide them the funds to be able to take control of their own situation. And these, Simil, can you go back a little? One slide back, yeah. And so all of us, the organizations, the CBOs and the NGOs are basically helping the wards and their ward committees become more powerful. We actually began with a situation where there were no ward committees. And over the last few years, we have been able to make sure that this gets set up. And now we are trying to see that the powers are actually decentralized from the state and the municipal corporations to these ward committees. We have a unique way of functioning. What we have done is we provide fellowships. We provide fellowships to individuals within organizations or even public fellows who have an idea, who want to see how this can be converted into a pilot and be demonstrated in the city, which works with the broad aims that we laid out in the beginning of our program. Yeah, next. So this is just to give you an idea of the different types of fellowships that are being implemented. There are a huge diversity of people working on very diverse subjects. The ones highlighted in yellow are some of the 3 case studies that we will present to you, so that you get an idea of how we function on any particular subject that is taken up. So yeah, so I'll ask Asim now to give you an idea of these 3 case studies. Thank you. Asim, your mic is off.
So now we will share a few transformative demonstrations that we are able to demonstrate here over last 1 decade. So water is a precious resource in arid regions like Bhuj, and therefore our ancestors has developed Bhuj on a 100 square kilometer aquifer, which was recharged through a complex system. 4 large lakes along with over 70 ponds were developed with 3 rivulets connected with divergent channels and aqueducts to fill these lakes in order to fulfill the water requirement of the city. The system was functional till 60, but as deep borewells and pipelines laid down to transport water from 1,000 kilometers away, this system was ignored, and this centralized water system further marginalized these poor areas with unequal distribution of water. As per ACT, enough water from the rainfall, and it can fulfill the water requirements if the old system is restored and recharge facilities be developed. 70% of these channels and systems has been repaired by the program. This is a colony which got flooded during monsoon as drainage.
El proyecto durante el monzón y pudimos mejorarlo.
Water recharge pits in the
Aquí podemos ver las distintas imágenes para eliminar.
Improve the water quality, but also improved water quality as well as quantity by recharging the aquifer below the colony. This photograph is from an informal settlement where water pumped from a well to a water tank and then distributed in the settlement. And this entire system is managed by the community. The person standing in the first photograph is Mr. Dayaram. He is an HIC fellow and he works for water stressed areas. With the technical support of ACT and monetary support from HIC, Bhuj municipality, and from community contributions, many deprived areas have been benefited due to his efforts. There are over 30 municipal schools have been installed with roof rainwater harvesting systems, and children from water stressed areas are known to fill their water bottles and then take back to their hands for their parents. More than 40% of water comes from this repaired and recharged water aquifer now, and these marginalized communities are managing their own water systems irrespective of municipality. Housing is another major issue for poor in our cities. About 30% of population lives in slum areas without having adequate housing and basic services. A slum-free city plan of action has been prepared by the program for the Bhuj city that shows everyone can be housed with ground plus one structures with sparing 30 hectare land in the city. And to demonstrate this approach, 3 slums having about 314 houses were selected to demonstrate in the first phase. In the slums where SHGs, self-help groups, were active and willing to take up this process. The lady in the first photograph is a community leader, and she is also a member of Sakhi Sangini, and she helped a lot to organize people, engage people, and ensure the process. These are some of the photographs. So,
Asim, perhaps could you wrap up so that we could
here we have
and during the dialogue session?
Okay.
Yeah,
so here we have
go to the end now. Asim, just show the pictures, then we can go ahead.
So these are some of the photographs of the redeveloped site, and we also work for the women empowerment and
It's okay, you can go to the last slide.
Can you conclude, Sandeep?
Yeah, take it to the last slide. Yeah. So basically what we are, while we have been able to, show that it is possible to have decentralized ways of working, one of the major challenges we face is how to upscale. Because in a right-wing, centralized, corrupt polity, which is increasing over the years, in the last few years, we have a challenge of how to scale up these ideas, which we are still trying to work with. The only way we are trying to work with on that is to make sure that the people, the CBOs, are powerful and are taking the help of the judiciary in making sure that their powers and their rights are given to them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you. I'm sorry to cut it short, and I hope that we will be able to talk more during the question answer dialogue, especially because maybe people did not fully grasp how amazing this experience is, because it was the people of Bourges who just decided, enough, we're going to take over that city planning, we're going to do this. And they did it with just the people organized, self-organizes, and not waiting for the local government. And the challenge of scaling this transformation from the grassroots is something very interesting that we could address. Our next speaker is Bryce Detroit. Bryce is an Afrofuturist artist, activist, and a pioneer of entertainment justice. As a cultural designer, he's an national award-winning music producer, performer, and curator. Through his practice, Bryce Detroit demonstrated the power of using music, entertainment, arts, and native legacy to design cultural infrastructure for preserving, producing, and promoting new diasporic African narratives. In cultural literacy and cooperation neighborhood-based economy, Bryce Detroit is the 2019 New Museum Ideas City Fellows and the 2017 Night Art Challenge Award winner. A prominent community activist and advocate, Bryce Detroit grows intersectional self-determined communities as a founding member of Oakland Avenue Artists Coalition, co-founder of Detroit Community Wealth Fund, director of the Cultural and Center for Community-Based Enterprise, and international delegate for the East Michigan Environmental Action Council. Bryce is going to tell us about his campaign, which is Hood Clothes to Gentrifier, which I have this sweater here, and please do check his website. I will put it on the chat, and his latest album, Structured Water. Take it away, Bryce.
Awesome. Boom, and there's a video. I'm gonna see if this screen share works. Is my screen being shared?
It is, yes.
Okay, awesome. So let me actually. Okay, peace everyone. I am Bryce Detroit. My practice is called entertainment justice. Boom, first off, before going there, let me put my timer on because I have a tendency to speak long. Want to bring my ancestors into the space. So first I'm going to acknowledge my maternal grandmother, Susan Sappho Chavis, Ashe, my maternal grandfather, Alonzo Clemens Anderson, Ashe. My paternal grandmother, Mildred Willoughby Small, Ashe. And my paternal grandfather, Wilbert Franklin Small Sr., Ashe. So my practice is called entertainment justice. Created this practice for myself 10 years ago as a record producer, songwriter, performing artist, extracting myself out of a corporate music space, corporate entertainment space, knowing that my skill sets existed in the realm of behavior science, being responsible for creating content, producing content that effectively influences particular points of self-identity, as well as influences for certain points of behavior modification, particularly the consumer. So extracted myself from that career track in 2009 to bring my skills to service for my people. In particular, looking at what is the way that entertainment art can intersect from a racial justice perspective, can intersect with social justice, climate justice, and economic justice to support these movements in a very concrete way. So one way that supporting movements, particularly as it relates to placekeeping and placemaking in my Detroit neighborhood, which is called the North End, one way that that's looked is have been doing programming for the last 6, 7, well, in my neighborhood for the last 7 years for sure, but throughout Detroit for the last 10 years. And this entertainment programming with the emphasis on using entertainment art to create opportunities, entertainment art at the intersection of design and architecture as well, to create opportunities for diasporic African people to investigate, question, affirm, celebrate positive points of ancestrally rooted identity and lifestyle, looking at that as a prerequisite for a person being able to be in their agency, present in their own agency, and then self-actualize to their heart's desires. I'm going to go back to this slide right here, Detroit African. So created this phraseology for myself in 2012 as a decolonizing mechanism. One thing that personally have acknowledged, one of the things that makes it challenging for a diasporic African born in America to actually see themselves as the custodian of their built environment, the architect, designer of their built environment, the determiner of their reality, is a colonized point of self-identity that exists within their imagination. It is a very common, peculiar phenomenon where many diasporic Africans born in America, the image that we hold in our imagination of ourselves is usually, it starts off as a descendant of slavery, a human citizen who exists as a part of a global slave class that only has 500 to 600 years of history that primarily start in America, a self-image and identity that shows themselves usually being on the short end of all of the proverbial sticks, the oppressed, the disadvantaged. Starting from there and starting from that point of identity and that point of narrative, then it makes it challenging for many to actually get to a point in their life where they see themselves in their imagination as the champion, as the successful being, as the determiner of their reality, as one who has perfect agency in how they self-actualize. So being very clear on that, then doing programming that supports the self-identity, cultivating healed, healthy, radiant points of self-identity. And then it's from there that we can present new ideas through music and through architecture, new ideas that inspire new imaginations. And in these new imaginations, we can see ourselves in these affirmed ways, imagining ourselves actually taking control of our built environment, actually leading processes in our communities, in our neighborhoods, actually directing and guiding the course of our own life and manifestation of our own reality. And putting that as a context, because this conversation about gentrification that I'm having through my new project called, the project is called Roadwork, and the first installation in the Roadwork series is Hood Close to Gentrifiers. For me, this project, which was just recently launched in September, I have a minute left, launched in September, the point of it was for me to officially broadcast my own personal politic. Let me stop this because I'm not effectively scrolling through my slides. But for me to project my own personal politic in my neighborhood, in particular on the in the places where my own land use strategies are being deployed, like where my own neighborhood development work is happening. Put this sign there so that the writing is on the wall, so to speak, as a point of neighborhood diplomacy, making it clear what are the codes and cultural standards that we have here. Hood Closed to Gentrifiers is also the second part of an affirmation, the hood is closed to gentrifiers because first, for the past 10, 15 years, there are people in my neighborhood, including myself, who have opened up new opportunities and avenues for self-development, collective leadership development, as well as bringing in our own resources to purchase underserved, underutilized land and then develop it based on our own indigenous cultural context. So that's the full sentence. We have opened up new opportunities to develop our own places in our own neighborhoods based on our ancestrally rooted points of identity and lifestyle. Therefore, we are closed to conventional business as usual, which typically looks like outsiders coming in, inserting their imagination, invisibilizing and displacing culture and economy, inserting a white body architectural imagination on our scenario, and then constructing environments that do not serve us socially, culturally, politically, or economically. My timer went off, so I'm aware that that was 8 minutes. This is a very full conversation. I'm grateful for this space and look forward to more time during the discussion part.
Thank you, Bryce, and we're so grateful to have you here and hear about your campaign. Next is Asume, who is going to tell us about what's going on in Nigeria, in Lagos, Nigeria. Isaac Asume Osuaka coordinates the Social Action International, an organization promoting resource democracy, climate justice, and human rights in West Africa through research and monitoring popular education and advocacy in solidarity with communities, activists, and scholars. Asume's research and advocacy focus on energy, oil and gas, climate change and conflict, trade, and debt. Asume previously served as coordinator of Oil Watch Africa, a network of organizations supporting communities impacted by the petroleum industry in the continent. He holds a doctorate in environmental studies from York University in Canada, where he has been a member of faculty and visiting scholar. Asume is also a participant of the Global Working Group Beyond Development. To you, Asume.
Thank you, Mabrouka, and thanks, comrades. I appreciate the opportunity to be part of this collective and to have contributed together with my comrade Abiodun Aremo to this volume. Our chapter focuses on Makoko in Lagos. Lagos is the commercial capital of Nigeria, the largest city in Africa. And Abiodun, my colleague who co-authored this chapter with me, is actually more rooted in the community in Lagos, and he has had an intimate relationship with what we discuss in the chapter. He has been part of movement for housing rights. He has struggled with slum dwellers from the late 1980s and 1990s, and he's still very much involved. We work together in the pro-democracy movement in Nigeria. We continue to work together, promoting popular alternatives, promoting Pan-Africanist understanding and anti-colonial education in Nigeria. So Makoko, the community that we talk about, is described as a floating slum. And there are some people, particularly Western tourists and Western journalists, have described it as the Venice of Africa. And such romanticization makes it attractive to tourists from Europe, especially who make sure to visit Makoko anytime they are in Lagos. However, the story of Makoko is more than that. It is a story of solidarity, story of struggles, and stories of contested visions for social change and for urban transformation in Lagos. The story of Makoko speaks to the reality of marginalization and dispossession of the poor in urban planning. It is about a community with some of the most impoverished people in Lagos who are making a claim to being a legitimate part of the city, a legitimate part of the population and the landscape of the city. Fundamentally, the story of Makoko shows how colonialism shaped and continued to shape urban development, and how the character of former colonies like Nigeria remain fundamentally unchanged. So urban development in Nigeria from the colonial beginnings was part of the process of the plunder involving the evictions of indigenous communities to make way for the needs of corporations and the powerful elite. We find with the story of Makoko that the character of the state remains changed. Makoko is a story of radical transformation in practice, with its beauty and many imperfections. As I would say, there's a story of the rural poor standing up to the state and insisting on the right to share the city space. Now, Makoko is an indigenous community, a fishing community that survived the creation of Lagos. Lagos was, as a city, was created by British colonialists that sought to build an administrative center and a port for their commerce, for their trade, and also for their colonial project. And in the process of doing that, many of the indigenous communities were evicted from their settlements and moved to the margins. Many of those people moved to areas like Makoko or Morocco, which were in the margins, and these places were not actually part of the original city plan. But there they existed, doing their thing, mostly existed as fishermen, as the population of Lagos grew, particularly following independence, so-called independence in 1990. More people continue to flock into the city of Lagos, and those who, because of their economic status, because of their low income or unemployment, could not afford to rent a room in the planned city, ended up in places like Morocco or Makoko. And what people did was to actually go dive into the water with their bare hands, with buckets, and dredged the land, reclaimed soil, and built on top of it. So it was a self-reclamation project, getting land to build on, and that continued for a while. But with more people moving in to the areas, people now started to introduce a kind of architecture that was already common in the mangroves of the Niger Delta, where people build houses on stilts. And so the houses are above water, and that is why Makoko is referred to as the floating slum. And this continued into the 80s and the 90s. And while hundreds of thousands of people were subsisting and living their lives in Makoko, in Morocco, and other slum settlements, in coastal slum settlements, the state basically ignored them. There were no social amenities, state infrastructure did not touch the areas. The people had to provide everything for themselves. Many of these people, of course, didn't just exist in Makoko. Some of them the major occupation of the people in these areas is fishing. And so there's a major fishing industry in the area. People, and there are people involved in processing of the fish. There are those that go to catch fish. There are those like the woman that we see on the screen smoking the fish, and the fish is sold in the city of Lagos and in other areas. There are those that are also involved in canoe making. The canoe, the craft that is used for fishing, the people carve it with wood, in that area. There are people that are providing services, hairdressers, barbers. Those establishments exist in the community. There are many people in those communities that work outside of the area. Even civil servants, even police officers who cannot afford poorly paid workers in the factories who cannot afford accommodation elsewhere end up in slums like Makoko. Things began to change for these communities from the late 80s, and particularly from 1990, following the construction in Lagos of what the third mainland bridge in Lagos. This bridge that connects to two sections of Lagos carries very heavy traffic, and there are a lot of people that move between the mainland and the island of Lagos for work each day. Millions of people actually, and it's come to the building of the bridge. That was commissioned around 1990, exposed the community, exposed Maroko and Makoko and other similar communities to the people that did not see those places before. And so it presented a stark picture. Makoko did not seem to fit into the picture of what a city should look like. It seemed poor, it seemed dirty, and all of that. And beginning from 1990, the military government at that time started a process of demolishing the slums, beginning with Morocco. So there was major demolition in Morocco. People were basically forced out. Their homes were bulldozed without any notice. It was like a day or two notice was given to them, and the next thing bulldozers came in, and that was a major tragedy that resulted in the forced evictions of hundreds of thousands of people. Those that were evicted from Morocco without compensation some of them ended up in Makoko and continued to live their lives until 2012, when an eviction program was commenced by the Lagos State government, post-military government in Lagos State. And it's important to point out the impact of neoliberal economic practices that was introduced via structural adjustment originally in the 1980s, and how this led to restructuring of the economy in favor of free market, the so-called free market privatization, and the increasing inequality that ensued, the loss of jobs, particularly public sector jobs through retrenchments, following privatization of publicly owned enterprises. All those contributed to the swelling up of the population of cities like Makoko. But the rich that emerged, the wealthy that emerged, during as part of that privatization process, those that took advantage of public wealth were the ones who now targeted the land that the people had created for themselves in places like Morocco and Makoko, and sought to promote a vision of urban renewal that involves, Western style waterfront development that had absolutely, in which the people in places like Makoko were not part of that picture. So a struggle started, particularly people remembered what happened in 1990 when Morocco was demolished. And this time they said, look, they were not going to accept, they were not going to allow. So there was mobilization, there was solidarity, and the people stood up. There were a lot of protests and insisted that it will not happen this time, that Makoko will not be evicted. What?
Thank you, Asume. I'm going to ask you to wrap up, and also, maybe in the dialogue we can talk about Makoko Morocco in light of the recent police killing during the dialogue session. So I'll ask you to wrap up. Thank you.
Okay, so just to wrap up, I remember the point that Maria made earlier in presentation, even Bryce just before me, pointing out that in having visions of urban transformation, that it is important to consider what works for the people in the area, that urban renewal or urban transformation should not be based on the outsiders inserting their architectural imagination into the environment. This is exactly what we saw in Makoko, and at the end of the day, in the process of collaboration, partnerships, to try to see, to protect Makoko, we saw a situation where alternative ideas, particularly architectural ideas, sometimes supported by international development agencies, came to dominate. And sometimes these ideas didn't find, get traction in the community. And ultimately, some of the pilots that were constructed did not last because they were not rooted in the local knowledge and understanding. And so that is also part of the things that we need to understand going forward in these discussions. While solidarity, while partnerships are important to protect housing rights, it is important that the power of the victims or the power of the people, the marginalized, should be protected in the processes. Stop there.
Thank you, Asume. And like I said, in the question and dialogue, I'm sure a lot of people will have a question about what's going on right now and the struggle of Makoko and Morocco. Next, so I would like to thank all our speakers and introduce Juliana Moraes de Guz. She has generously accepted to comment on the book. Juliana was a member of the regional articulation of Afro-descended from Latin America and the Caribbean. She's a PhD student in sociology at UMass Amherst. She holds a master's degree in political science, a BA in political science from University of Brasilia. She has published articles, The Success, Science, and Epistemology Situated Knowledge in the review, in the Feminist Review, as well as theoretical analytical approach on prostitution. Currently, Juliana is working on a book manuscript called Du Bois on Latin America and the Caribbean, Trans-American Pan-Africanism and Global Sociology, co-author with Professor Agustin Lau Montes and Dr. Jorge Vasquez from UMass Amherst. Additionally, Juliana is studying the connection between decolonial praxis, urban politics, and Black movements in Latin America. Her dissertation theme, which is her dissertation theme. Juliana also works in a wide range of social movement in the Americas. In particular, she has collaborated with sex workers organization in the struggle for workers' rights, with urban land settlement organized by Black and poor people, and with anti-prison movements. In the last 3 years, she has focused and strengthened the connection between Black movements and the Americas. Thank you, Juliana.
Hello, good morning. At least here it's morning. I would like to thank especially Mabrouka and Miriam for the invitation. It's a pleasure to comment this book that I think comes in a very important moment, right? So we know that recently population and world population is becoming each time more urban. In that the urban has its specificities about how we can create another world in urban spaces. So when I was reading the book, authors of the book, they already show quite clear the connections between urban spaces and cities as result and facilitators of capitalism. So taking this into consideration, I really appreciate to be able to comment this book. I would like to add a little bit and connect it especially with Latin America and Brazil, that I'm from Brazil, so I was requested to do. That beyond being connected with capitalism, cities has been defined by academics and politicians as the spatial representation of Western modernity. We can take since from the beginning of urban studies, for example, being urban is associated with being modern, with embody individualistic, competitive, capitalist culture. And we can, in Latin America especially, we have since the 60s very strong development discourses that promoted urbanization as the way to reach a kind of colonial mindset of what development is, and imposed global north cities as models to the global south. So even nowadays, you have organizations such as the World Bank and the United Nations pushing kind of good practices in urban planning that are rooted in this kind of idea. In Latin America, this has been particularly strong. We had, and I'm going to focus on our indigenous and Black movements. We have secured since the 80s, more or less, more than a lot of the rights to territory, especially based on the recognition of our ancestral groups. So we have something like an area a little bit larger than Mexico recognized as territories of indigenous and Afro-descendant movements in Latin America. Most of them protected by the Convention 169, that is the Convention of Tribal People. But most of these communities are in rural areas. And although how many of the institutions look at us, it is as the savage, the group who live in these rural
A grupos que viven en muchas de estas zonas y
which does not mean that communities and ancestral communities do not exist in urban areas. Indeed, in Brazil, we have many Maroon communities in big cities recognized by the state, but often when we claim the right to our land, how countries have pictured us that if you're in an urban space, you cannot access the politics that ensure rights to ancestral communities. So again, this is just one of the examples of the importance to consider the specificity of the urban for the social struggles for social justice. I want to add here, I'm not saying that being urban, that the urban space, it's above the rural area, it's not. And I think the book makes a great, one of the contributions to this book is to make great connections between urban and rural struggles. But to understand, if you understand the specificities of what engage, create alternative words, create another word in the space, we hardly can build strategies that are successful. So this is one of the biggest contributions of this book. However, I would like to bring some challenges in dialogue with what we have read and what the presentations have talked also. That is the importance to understand the connection between race and the denial of spatial existence. So since slavery, part of how Black people have been dehumanized is denying to us rights to spatial dimensions, one of the basic dimensions of human being, right? This has happened with displacements, this has happened with murders, this has happened with imprisonment. And in particular nowadays, cities has been sites of transformation, but also one of the biggest sites of violence, especially of homicides and police killings. And this is a phenomenon that happens in the United States, but also in Brazil and other countries of Latin America. A big part of population imprisoned are also coming from urban areas. So when you think about that, and some of the chapters really bring the idea of how like urban development policies, they talk about cleaning the space, cleansing, about to transform the space in a more hygienic space. Many people have denounced how these ideas of cleansing are connected with the idea of erase Blackness, of erase whitening the space. And that is what has guided. We cannot talk about gentrification as separated from that. And you cannot talk about displacement as separate from that. Some of, in the particular chapter on Brazil, for example, many communities that are struggling to create another world in urban spaces are mentioned. And it's important to say that I know in person, many of them, they are majority Black and led by Black women. So when you think also about what is to create a new world in urban cities, we are still dealing with the increasing of public security policies, increasing surveillance, incarceration, and violence, in these kinds of violence, right? Because you have other kinds in urban communities, literally denying to us not only our neighborhood, but the right to our own bodies, right? So that when we're talking about spatial existence, it's important to think that we're not only saying, oh, it's important to have my neighborhood safe. Nowadays, the situation has come to the point that we're talking about having our body not murdered, not raped, not put in prison, right? So I put my timer here, so I'm sorry that I look all the time to the side, but I'm trying to, I have a tendency to talk too much too. So I'm trying to be short. So the book brings, so to conclude, because I'm close to 8 minutes, the book brings amazing contributions for us to think about exactly what is the connections between the rural and the urban. How can we challenge the spatial representation of Western modernity? How can you challenge any kind of association between being urban and being white, or being urban and incorporated capitalism, and be urban and embody development discourses? And this is central for the struggles nowadays. But it's also important and to continue to talk and to embrace and to reflect on how race has coordinated many of the transnational urban policies that has been implemented nowadays, denying for everybody from racialized bodies, not only Blacks, but for all racialized bodies, any access, a basic dimension of being human, that is space, right? So I conclude by saying that it's a quite important book, and I recommend everybody reading. I was very pleasured with and amazed by all the work that was done, and congratulate the co-workers for this amazing work.
Thank you very much, Juliana, especially for pointing out the dimension of racialization and bridging with Bryce's and also Asume's talk on this. Thanks for the great comment. Now I would like to ask all authors of the book and members of the core group of the Global Tapestry of Alternatives and of our working group and of Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, who are in this inner room, to turn their cameras on so that people can see us all for a moment. And I would like to invite, first, we are going now to dialogue about what we have heard. And we already have some questions, some interesting questions in the questions and answers. Anyway, I invite you to put some more in there. If you have any comments also, they are very welcome. And we would now first have a quick round of comments or questions between these organizers of the event and part of the processes who have brought us here. So welcome anyone who wants to speak. Yes, Ashish, maybe you just briefly introduce yourself before speaking.
Sure, thanks, Miriam. I'm Ashish Kothari. I work in India with an environmental action group, Kalpavriksh, and I'm also a member of the Global Working Group on Beyond Development and a core team member of the Global Tapestry of Alternatives. So it's been a pleasure to help organize this. I think that was an amazing, what I felt most was that 8 minutes simply didn't do justice to the kind of complexity and depth of each of these case studies. But I know we have limited time on these webinars. But it was fantastic introduction, and I especially like the sort of the kind of combination of what we heard was cities of dignity, but also cities of indignity, and what are the sort of contestations between the two. My question follows a little bit from what Juliana said towards the end, which is much of the discussion and the case studies as presented have been on the urban. And I'm wondering how the panelists or the authors would like to look at the relationship between the urban and the rural, which are often seen as binaries, as being two completely different, completely opposite kind of situations. Whereas we know that that's not necessarily the case. And in fact, trying to build towards both cities and villages of dignity, we need to see how those, I'm asking whether in fact that kind of a binary should be broken down. What then would be the relationship between the urban and the rural that could lead to dignity in both places? So if any of the panelists would like to reflect on that. Thank you.
Something that comes up for me immediately is the rural context for me as a Black-bodied man, a diasporic African in America, the rural context for me starts with the place where my ancestors come from. My mother's side, her people are from Kentucky and Mississippi. My father's side, his people are from North Carolina and South Carolina, small rural towns. To that point, one rural context is it's in the rural where a lot of our ancestral and indigenous points of identity and cultural practice still exist and can be found in terms of like legacy. So there is an intentionality for sure in my environmental and climate justice work. We have this initiative called Up South, Down South, where we have been intentionally deepening our bond with folks from Jackson, Mississippi, because so many people in Detroit, our people migrated from Mississippi. And doing that, one is as a point of decolonizing and ancestral, like re-ancestralizing. Another is to be more sophisticated in the way that we actually look at the systemic issues, and in particular, trace back the real origins and roots of what we think we're addressing or fighting today. Yes, the one thing that both places tend to have in common, especially as it relates to Black-bodied people, indigenous people in America, is poverty and lack of self-determined economic and socio-political infrastructure. So even though a rural scenario, it may appear on the surface that there may be deeper challenges in creating economic infrastructure or socio-political infrastructure, and it's a bit easier in an urban scenario because you have more there's a more convenient access to technology. In fact, the policies that are on the books in places like Detroit are policies that stem from the top of the 20th century, the end of the 19th century, policies that were reflective of the 19th century in America, which was a time replete with slavery economy. So we'll stop there, but just really noting that on the first two points of connecting the rural to the urban, one is to deepen ancestral connection and to reconnect with indigenous culture and practices. And then another is to be able to see the commonalities, the socio-political and economic commonalities of both places, knowing that it's in that type of solidarity, that translocal and transnational solidarity, where hyperlocal solutions and innovations will be birthed.
Thank you, Bryce. We have another author of the book here who has not been on the panel, but would like to answer to that question. This is Ana Rodriguez. She will talk in Spanish. So I invite you to use the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen and just switch to the, so that you, I think you don't have to do anything, right? The interpretation will come to this room in English, I guess. Anyway, I just wanted to warn you that she's going to speak Spanish. Ana, please, go ahead.
Ana is an author and a co-editor of the book, just wanted to say.
Yes, that's right.
Thank you, gracias. Una acotación, muchas gracias a todos.
Thank you very much for this presentation of this book, which has been a global effort. I think it's important that what we are saying, consider what the colleagues from India and others have said regarding rural issues. Certainly, to include the question about informality. Cities like Quito in the global south, and many of the cases of this book, Cities of Dignity, give visibility to something that is linked with something showed by the COVID, something that was there and that was put forward as a struggle, global struggle in demanding rights. What those struggles meant. In our case, in Quito, we worked from a huge market of fresh food, gathering thousands of workers in a network, articulating rural and the city, but not only from the economic point of view or distribution of food, but also as a way of organizing life in the city. We cannot consider relations in one way from the rural to the city, but rather we have to consider this space, the space of popular market, not only as a space of food, but as a place of social reproduction, Quichua language, of knowledge, ancestors' knowledge that have been there for centuries. So during these times, when we think about that, when we think about this book, we didn't have a lockdown or the pandemic. It was just a little group, so like ours, the Global Working Group, but nowadays it's a problem affecting a lot of people. It's more visible, and it becomes a policy question. How can we, from those small cases showing that the rural problem becomes a problem for the cities? In the case of Quito, more than a third of the population eats fresh food from those production systems, and it's conditioned by two factors. They're not measured, so there's no measurement. They are criminalized, as our colleague Juliana from Brazil was saying. And from the other side, they are reinventing themselves. They are able to build the family, the economics of the family in the rural and urban area. So the issue now is much more visible. How can we in this role as intermediaries of that knowledge, how can we interact?
Son nuevos centros, ¿no? nuevas tendencias.
Left, new trends. We have elections in different places in the world that are surprising. What is our role as intermediaries to recenter the problem of rural, urban, and informality, and to include it in the agenda of a new city? In the case of this dialogue that we have, we talk about a new proximity, how local can be reproduced at a global level in exercises like this dialogue, how we can do it when the global has been unable to answer those problems. What is the role of these spaces?
That was Ana Rodriguez from Ecuador in South America. Juliana, very briefly, please, before we go to the questions from.
Sorry, just a quite brief comment because I was sharing here on the chat about how amazing it is the connections that you have transnationally. So Bryce was talking about how his connection with the ancestrals. Indeed, the MTSTB, for example, one of the movements quoted in the book, their slogan is "Let's make Palmares again." And Palmares was a Maroon community in Brazil in the struggle against slavery. And most of Maroon communities are in rural areas, but it also is a connection between how ancestrality and our connection with our families who are still there in rural areas, and our communities are still there in rural areas also feed and inspire even in connection with struggles in urban spaces. So it was just a short comment about the amazingness of these connections between different countries.
Great, thanks, Juliana. So we have a question, a very interesting question from Hansley Giuliano, who is actually connected to what Anna just said. And he says, or she says, the intro to the book highlighted the argument that struggles are not limited to the local or national level, but also fought on a global scale. How do you see the likely conduct of transnational action on this issue under the COVID-19 pandemic, whether or not a vaccine is forthcoming? Do you find that our current new normal communication setup is facilitating it or highlighting further resource inequalities for cross-country campaigns? How can they be addressed? So who of you would like to answer to Hansley?
Miriam,
go ahead.
If I may, I answered Hansley very briefly in the chat as well. I think from what I observe and also being involved with different social movements that are engaged transnationally, we've been adjusting to the new normal situation in terms of either recalibrating our strategies as well as maximizing existing technologies, even though they're very also unequal and also suspect because they're owned and controlled by the big corporations and big tech. But I think one of the key things here is that movements are already trying to internationally network, share learning, share solidarity. I think this initiative is one of them in terms of trying to learn what's happening with different parts of the world. However, I think the main challenge is that there indeed is no substitute to face-to-face and people-to-people interaction, in which many of the cases that in our book have already in fact surveyed, because it's being with another person, sharing that energy as well as learning from the histories. There's no substitute in that except the face-to-face interaction, and unfortunately because of COVID-19 we couldn't do that. And the other challenge is that many of the grassroots communities, I think both in the global north and in the global south, still suffer from inequalities and asymmetries in terms of connections to the internet. And this is one of the main challenges, I think, in many of our communities here in the Philippines, because it's mainly privatized, as well as connections are very bad. So it's hard to get them to even join webinars or calls because of the inequalities that exist. So, I mean, I don't have a sort of like a black and white answer to the question of Hansley, but I think social movements are trying to maximize as much as possible what's existing, and as well as continue the struggle in terms of exposing both how inequalities are filtering down to different aspects of our daily lives, and at the same time continuing the work of building alternatives by writing stories, by whatever, in whatever form, to be able to show that indeed there are some movements happening despite the COVID.
Mabrouka?
We have a question for the whole panel, and it comes from Zach Hayden, actually, who's out in Montgomery, and he's involved with the automative free clinic, which I briefly mentioned. So please do check his work, and it's featured in the book, chapter 5. Zach has a very interesting question. He's asking all of you, can we discuss the role of popular education in your work? Yeah, Bryce, go ahead.
Okay, so for me and many others in the movement community in Detroit, pardon me, I'm taking this barrette out of my daughter's hair as well as talking. So yeah, but for many of us, we acknowledge that we have, in a Western context, in a colonizer narrative, only a narrow range of intelligences or expressions of intelligence are acknowledged or validated, and only particular modes of education, information dissemination are validated. It just so happens that these methods and modalities are always outside of our indigenous and ancestral cultural context. So popular education, what we call popular education, is really for us just organic, indigenous, native learning, collective learning. It is vital because one of our major issues to resolve in this 21st century, or in this particular lifetime that we share together, is the implications of colonial thinking and colonial points of identity that have been planted in diasporic African and indigenous populations around the planet, and how that is one of the main inhibitors to us not only fully self-actualizing, but just on a more basic level, being able to orient properly and in a synergistic way with our built environment, with the land, and with our people. So yes, the phrase popular education is what's used to describe these ancestral and indigenous modalities for communicating and shared learning. Yet that's really at the core of what's going on, is that it's ancestral and indigenous forms of communicating and sharing information with each other.
Thanks, Bryce. Then we have a question here for Asume from Ananta Krishnan. I lived in Nigeria for 4 years, just wondering how the much reported floating school of Makoko has been adopted by the Lagos state government as a model that will be used for developing the houses on water in the community. At the same time, poor quality water, mosquitoes which thrive in nearby lagoons, and dangerous jobs all serve to impact on people's health in Makoko. So the question is, how are these issues addressed by Lagos government and the community and the UN agencies in Nigeria? Asume, please.
Thank you. The floating school was one of the most celebrated developments in the whole Makoko, the partnerships between the community and different groups, including a few NGOs international development agencies. The floating school was celebrated as an architectural wonder of some sort. Kunle Adeyemi, an architect, designed the school. It was funded by consortia of development agency as a pilot. The interesting thing is that while the floating school was celebrated outside Makoko, the people in Makoko themselves were a little bit hesitant about the school, about the structure, the structural integrity of the building. These are people who had better knowledge of the geography, and they didn't feel that the school was going to be secure enough in difficult weather, and they were right, because the school collapsed. It completely collapsed, and it was a good thing that there was nobody at the time in the building, and so nobody was hurt. The collapse of the floating school basically ended that idea, and that is why it is important that even as there is need to consider innovation, and that there should be participation of the community people, even in the design process. Because if the architects had considered the views of community people, it is possible that a different structure, will have emerged, and to have a more durable building. But that is not the case. So the collapse of that pilot, the floating school, seemed to have ended that a lot of discussion about that kind of possibility, in terms of what is happening now in Makoko and similar places. The hard life, from our perspective, if you were outside, you are looking in, you see that the people do not have access to health infrastructure, health services, to even the kind of schools that people elsewhere used to. That remains the same. What has been the response of the Lagos state government? It has been pretty much the same. The people in places like Makoko do not really matter to the government. There are NGOs and some international agencies that still continue to have a presence in Makoko, implementing different projects, sometimes in solidarity and partnership with sections of the community, and that is still ongoing. But what is fundamental from our point of view is the need to go beyond incremental amelioration and project-type developments like the floating school represents, to work with the people, not just in Makoko, but in other marginalized community, to build real popular power that will translate into political change, to translate into the kind of system, the kind of democratic system that will be more representative of the aspirations of all people. And it is only when we have that change at the political level. I'm not saying that incremental change is not needed.
No se necesite un cambio incremental en sentido de responder a las necesidades directas ambientales.
And to look also at the participation, and that brings to mind, just to add to what Bryce said concerning the question about popular education. Popular education in the case of Makoko and other such locations all over the country is something that is ongoing, that we try to promote understanding that popular education shouldn't be something that is taught based on a template, and that there's a co-learning and mutual learning. But there has to be, from our perspective, some idea history, an idea of anti-colonial messaging and anti-capitalist messaging. And this is in the context of popular education. Some of the challenges that we face, is how to determine what to be the subject, what to be the focus of education. What is the alternative? We have a situation where some of the people that are part of the popular education processes, including my comrade who co-authored the chapter, he's very, very active with the Amilcar Cabral Ideological School in Lagos. In fact, he is the founder, the coordinator of the most active popular education organization in Lagos, the Amilcar Cabral Ideological School. Part of the challenges we are facing is that we have, all of us, we have not been able to identify, to point to a concrete set of alternatives in terms of what the society that we want to build. People have come from backgrounds in all kinds of Marxisms and all kinds of orthodoxies, and sometimes they need to recreate even the ideas in terms of what we see for the future. That is something that we still work in progress, that we need to do, to deal with the theory, even as we deal with the practice.
Thanks, Asume. So I would like to take one last question from the public, asking the panelists to check what is there, what else, and maybe respond in writing what we cannot respond orally here. So Milun Kotari says, thanks for the great presentations. Are you all familiar with the detailed work that has been done by the UN, NGOs, academics, and so forth, using the human rights approach in analyzing the global urban crisis and in promoting the mobilization of movements and campaigns? A number of standards have been developed on the rights to housing and against displacement that can be of use. Also, the work on racial discrimination as a determinant of your urban polarization. A number of UN mechanisms are very focused on these issues. Are any of you using these standards and mechanisms? And do you find the human rights approach useful for your work? That was from Milun Kotari, I guess from India. And I would like to ask Marianne first to answer this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Miriam and Milun, for your answer. I haven't been following closely these developments around the human rights approach in analyzing the global urban crisis. But I do know that many of the human rights that we know of right now are actually rooted from many people's struggles. And in fact, human rights in itself are evolving concept. The very idea of right to the city wasn't even imagined maybe 10, 20 years ago. And now it's one of the key things that the UN and even, the United Local and City Government Council have been talking about. So that's one way in which the human rights is being pushed both by movements and being adopted by the UN. So in a way, at least in our book chapter, in the survey that we did, we found out that many of the people's movements and popular struggles are using human rights in their work. They might not use human rights as in the normative sense of the UN, but they are referring to people's rights. Because as we know, many governments don't recognize human rights in a sense. And even with the rise of right-wing populist governments, human rights has become a taboo. But I think the movements are also saying, and many of these radical urban transformations are going beyond human rights. It's the floor. It shouldn't be the ceiling. It's just the floor. It's the basic things that you should have, but you have to go beyond that. And I think that's where I suppose the limits as well as the potential of human rights are in terms of pushing for radical urban transformation. It's a starting point, but you have to go beyond it.
Juliana, you seem to want to add something to this. Am I right?
No, I actually don't feel. I do have some experiences with the United Nations, but I think that Mary said very clearly. I was just really happy to hear the thing, so I'm gonna abstain today.
Great. So now this would be an invitation to our panelists. If any one of you, we won't do a last round. I'm just inviting if maybe Sandeep or anyone wants to have last words. And then we will have an announcement from the Global Tapestry of Alternatives, and we will say goodbye.
There is I don't know if Bryce could respond to this question about the last, when you wrap up, if you can respond to Anantya, who says Detroit is a city is regenerating itself from decline after the issue of the auto industry. Is a model using art and culture contributing to commercial and cultural vitality, urban streetscapes, accessing and convenience, and ethics and social diversity while preventing gentrification? I think probably he's asking, is it enough to prevent gentrification? Thank you.
So,
yeah, so
pardon me.
Very brief, Bryce, or
yeah,
I don't know, now we have two speakers.
Yeah, super brief.
Yeah, and then we pass to you, Sandeep, okay?
Yeah.
Thank you, Sandeep and Miriam. No, it's not enough to stop gentrification, which is why I'm doing this project, Hood Close to Gentrifiers. To me, what's most important in this moment in the 21st century is to create a container for a sophisticated conversation where we thoroughly unpack economic, socio-political, and architectural violence and the modality which has been engineered, which we call gentrification, to perpetuate those things. Just as a context for what are the new stories and the new narratives of self-determined diasporic African and indigenous land use, neighborhood development. Like, let's uplift those stories so that we're present in the new models and the new practices. We can start to acknowledge our own wins, so to speak. And then from there, we are cultivating our identity, more deeply cultivating our identity as the architects, as the designers, as the custodians of our environment. To me, that is the thing. And being able to do that work and scale it across hyperlocals, transnationally, that work at scale is what, for me, will move the needle and begin to shift the paradigm. ...
Great, thanks. Sandeep, please.
Yeah, so I just wanted to try and put the whole thing into kind of a perspective again in terms of why are we doing this? We are doing this because we believe that there is another way, or the world can be a far more humane place to live in. And a lot of the values that the communities that we work with, especially those ones that are talking about building social capital, or constantly looking at the end product as building relationships at a spiritual level, looking at the ways in which we see God in one another. And it's completely dramatically opposed to the way the markets and the capitalist systems have developed these cities today, which is of looking at end products as material gains. And very often the communities in the cities that we live with and work with, they also need to be sometimes reminded of the origins from which they have tried to come and develop a new, different kind of way of living in this world today. And so at all times, if we are reinforcing a very different value system, it doesn't matter who holds it. Very often today, you find a lot of very young urban people who are so to speak, from the richer communities, are actually beginning to realize the mockery of the way this world has been built. And they are sometimes actually moving more towards the poorer communities and their values. And some of the young people in our slums or those communities are moving towards material gain. So it's really a question of holding on to the values and not the people and the constituencies that we must constantly remind ourselves when we are doing this kind of work. I'll stop over there.
I very much agree with those last words. The struggle is about what do we understand by quality of life, by a good life? How do we better our relations so that we can thrive? Thanks. Thank you very much, Sandeep. So yeah, I think this is the moment to thank you all to have joined this webinar. Also, the people who have joined it through the Facebook accounts, for example, in Delhi of the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. And to hand over to Ashish Kothari, our colleague and comrade from the GTA, who wants to announce where else you can have interesting subjects to participate in dialogues. And of course, I invite you to download the book, please, from the webpage. We posted, maybe Mabrouka, you can post it again in the chat if someone got in late. It is totally free for download, and we hope that you put it into circulation and that you use it in your processes, because this is what it's for. Ashish.
Thanks, Miriam. This has been a wonderful collaboration, but I think the ending from our side is going to be by Shrishti.
Oh, okay. Sorry then.
No, it has been a great conversation. So thank you for co-organizing this dialogue. It was such a tremendous learning. And Sandeep ji has anyway given it a very beautiful conclusion. So just want to announce that our next dialogue will be on the 17th of December by a group of academics working towards alternatives to capitalism. They will be talking to us about how do we conceptualize alternatives and grounding themselves with several examples from across the world. So do follow us here on this link for upcoming webinars, and hoping to see many of you who have joined us earlier also joining us today and in the future webinars. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you very much, Shrishti. Thank you again to all the people who have made this happen, especially to the team of the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation in Brussels. Thanks to the authors for having created this great book, and see you soon again in some creative spaces. Hopefully also in person.
Thank you, everybody. Peace.
Bye. Thank you.